Hello everybody, this is another video of one of my personal games. This was played last night at the Muswell Hill Chess Club. Muswell Hill were playing against West London and I was black against Jezierski, who I have actually played very recently in a tournament game, which I won. So I wasn't feeling too nervous about this game. I thought I should at least be able to draw. And he opened the game the same way as last time with g3. So I was very, very tempted to play h5 and hack, but I decided to choose a more mainline setup with d5. And after he fianchettos, I play knight f6. And now c4. So we've transposed into a type of English opening. And I just want to see what he's going to do next, really. So I think I'll set up a Slav, because white isn't really meant to fianchetto in the Slav, so I felt like this could favour me. But then when he transposes after knight f3, e6, and d4, we've basically now transposed into a Catalan position. So I decide that the most challenging move in the Catalan is taking on c4, usually at move 4 for black, but this is my fifth move, but I do it anyway. So I thought that he would just play knight e5 to win the pawn back on c4, and then he gets a fairly good position from this opening. But instead, castles was played, which isn't as accurate as it looks. The reason is that because I've played c6 instead of bishop e7, which is often seen in the Catalan. I have enough time to be able to defend a lot of my light squares here, and I might even be able to play b5 later. So I decide to defend the pawn with knight bd7 first. It's coming to b6 to keep an eye on things. Queen c2, and now knight b6. So temporarily I'm a pawn up, and I'm going to just try and make it difficult for white to win the pawn back. I felt that if I played b5 instead, the long diagonal h1 to a8 could become very vulnerable with his bishop pointing at my rook. So that's why I haven't moved the b pawn yet. e4 is played to clamp down in the center, which I don't really mind because that means I'll be able to target d4 at a later point. There are now no pawns that can defend the d4 pawn. So I just developed naturally with bishop e7. And here I was expecting bishop to e3, or even g5 as a move, but instead knight bd2, aiming to win back the pawn. And I castle. Oh wait, I play bishop d7 first, actually, because the thing is that if knight takes c4, I'll take and he'll recapture, and e4 is not being protected by his queen on c4. So he can't yet take because of the e4 pawn. So he pushes, and although it gains space in the center for white, and d6 and other dark squares are a little bit weakened, I have knight to d5. So d5 is going to be the square for my knights for the foreseeable future. This should allow me to have a pretty solid position and not really be worse in this line of the Catalan. So at this point, he doesn't take yet. He did see that if he took on c4, knight b4 harassing the queen could just be a little bit troublesome. So he realizes I'm not going to protect the pawn at all, really. I can't protect it any more than I already am, so he can delay taking. I castle, and now he does take, and I decide to exchange off a pair of knights. just to ease the slightly cramped condition of my pieces. Now, the problem piece, as usual in these sort of Slav or Queen's Gambit positions, is the light squared bishop for black. So I want to gain space to allow it some freedom. b5, queen c2, and a5. So already I'm trying to go for a queenside attack. My idea is to perhaps play queen b6 and rook f to c8 here. And I want to prevent white from playing b4, which would clamp down on us on the c5 break, which is thematic in this line. So that's the reason for a5, preventing b4. So h4 is now played, and this is quite a subtle maneuver. The sort of hack, which at first it looks, has quite a lot of positional implications. As you may notice, the queen on c2 is eyeing the h7 pawn, and knight g5 wasn't possible because of my queen and bishop being lined up, protecting g5. So the reason for h4 is to be able to play knight g5, and then I'm going to be faced with difficulties. If I take the knight with the bishop, my dark squares are weakened forever, and I've lost the bishop pair. So black's position there does become quite difficult. Maybe not lost, but definitely worse. Whereas if I play a move like g6 to prevent queen h7 mate, then knight e4 can be played, and when the knight is on e4, it's hitting the c5 square, preventing me breaking. And the knight can also jump into c5, or even d6, clamping down on my position. So I need to prevent knight g5. So h6, and now bishop d2, which I was surprised at, actually. I thought knight d2 would be played, and the reason for that would then be to get to e4 with the knight via a different route. And at that point, I thought I might just about be able to get in the break on c5, like just in time. But it still would be tricky. But no, he doesn't play that. Bishop d2. So that gives me time for queen b6. Queen e4. So this move was quite surprising to me. I hadn't looked at this move at all. And originally I'd thought that it was to try and cleverly be able to prevent c5, because if I played it, he'd be able to take and then perhaps do something on the c file or use the queen and bishop battery on the long diagonal. I wasn't quite sure. So I broke with c5, and now the reason for queen e4 is revealed. Queen g4. Now, when I put this through the computer on analysis mode, it didn't really think this was too much to worry about. King h7 or king h8 is apparently all right for black, although it does look a little bit scary after there are potentially moves like knight g5 and bishop e4 coming. And if I take on g5 with the pawn, he'll recapture with the pawn, and then he'll have the open h file to play king g2, and then the rooks go on the h file. So maybe I am getting a bit scared there of all these attacking possibilities while not thinking of what I can do. But there's a lot of potential for attacks from white. So here I played a move which I thought looked good, but is perhaps not so great positionally. I played f5, and he takes, and I recapture with the knight to harass the queen. So the reason I thought this was good was that I decided that even though I've got the isolated king's pawn on e6, which will be a huge weakness, I thought the open f file targeting the f2 pawn and the sort of general better space for white was good compensation for the weak pawn structure. I think some people think that I'm a little bit too optimistic about space advantages, and I place too much importance on it. But I think that's just because of my style of play. I always prefer having a space advantage and being able to maneuver my pieces more fluidly and dynamically. So queen g6, and I harass the queen a bit more. And here I felt like his move wasn't very good. He played d takes c5, which allows me to take with the bishop, and now I'm targeting f2. So my pieces are working together very well. And here, maybe queen c2 is the best move. It's keeping the queen near the center. There's some sort of vague threats of being able to double on the c-file, and it does protect f2 once you move the bishop off d2. But instead, the rather perplexing move, queen b1, which I think is meant to allow a b4 break with the pawn. And here I was in two minds as to what to do. I've got a queen and bishop battery on f2, and I do want to target that square. So the two moves I could consider is, one, there's moving the bishop to c6 to connect the rooks and develop everything again. But the second move is knight g4, targeting f2. And I did look at this move for a very long time and didn't play it. But the computer gives this and bishop c6 as being almost level, but the computer values material a little bit more than I do, so it went for knight g4 as a very small preference over bishop c6. And after queen e4, which I'd looked at, this is the reason why I didn't play knight g4, is because of this fork on the rook and knight. But the computer gives bishop takes f2, king h1, and now bishop h5. So in my own analysis over the board, I had thought that bishop h3, knight f6, takes, king h8 was just going to be better for white after rook takes f2. Whoops. But if rook takes f2, there's knight e4, forking the rook and bishop, and there's also the pin on f3, two attackers on f3. White's losing a piece, so I'll regain the piece, and my pieces are far more active than White's pieces, and his king is far weaker than mine, so this would have been a better line. King g2 is the computer line, and black is still better after bishop takes g3, and black can go into an ending a pawn up. King takes g3, knight e4 check, forking the king and bishop, king g2, and now we remove the defender of the bishop with taking on f3 check, rook takes, king takes, knight takes check. So here black is a pawn up, but I feel that with pawns on both sides of the board, white should be able to draw this. Again, perhaps I'm being too optimistic, but I would say that if I was white, I think I could draw this. For example, king e3 is a move which would swap off minor pieces going into a rook endgame, and that is incredibly hard to win. So that's a potential move. King f4 is also good, trying to be active with the white king, and then maybe even white has a small edge. So I didn't really see this far ahead, though. I'm not a computer. So knight g4 I felt didn't work because of queen e4. So instead I played bishop c6. And I thought here I could play even knight e4, as the e4 square is under my control. There are vague threats of things like queen g6 trying to play bishop h6, but I could always play bishop e4, just trapping the queen if that happened. So I don't have any worries about white having a counterattack. Knight e5, and I trade off the fianchettoed bishops, but what's better, apparently, is bishop takes f2, rook takes, and knight e4. And this is a line I just didn't really see. I had sort of vaguely looked at things similar to this, but I always thought white was bailing out with a fairly good position. But it turns out that queen e1, rook takes f2, bishop e3, which I very, very briefly looked at a line. I think this might have been the line I looked at, and I thought bishop e3 won on the spot for white. But it turns out that rook takes g2 check, king takes, and after queen c7, white is simply a pawn down. So I'd missed the move rook takes g2 check, which just gives the exchange back rather than just losing a piece. So that was quite an interesting line as well. But I take, and the king takes, queen check. So I'm trying to target the king and have the queen and bishop both controlling very good diagonals. f3, which I did not expect, and I now thought maybe my queen could come to e2 in the future, or perhaps I could try and play g5, g4 with the pawn to exploit the pinned f3 pawn. So first I double attack the knight and bishop, and he protects it, and I deflect the bishop. So here I saw the only move was rook d1, really. And I drop the queen back, and now the bishop drops back. So the reason I did all this was partly I've advanced the b pawn, and I did tinker with the idea of playing simply just b takes a3, but I felt I was releasing too much tension and perhaps white could draw. What's also important though is that the rook has left the f-file, so that means the f3 pawn is a little bit weaker than it was before. And here I miscalculated horribly. I thought I had a win with the move knight g4. I thought this was a lovely move, because if knight takes, I have queen takes. And I think this is just simply winning on the spot, really. I'll be going quite a lot of material up. If king h3, there's queen h1 check, possibly, or queen f1, actually. So king h2, if nothing else, I could always play just queen takes g4. And I think that black here has a very, very strong position. I think practically winning. There's also, I think there might also be other moves, but this just looked like the most accurate one, queen takes g4. So knight takes g4 is not really possible, but rook d7, and here I thought, okay, queen b5. So the move I'd looked at for ages was queen g6. And what's annoying is that if I play queen e2, I thought that king h3 was a saving move. So I spent a long time looking at that position. But then I simply realized that I was completely wrong, and knight e3 wins on the spot. I think it's probably about a checkmate in 3 or 4 moves. Almost anywhere the king goes, I check with the queen. So if king h1 or h3, I have queen f1. Same thing with king f2 and king g1. I have queen f1 check. So just to show that, queen f1. Any other square except h2, the king goes to, I would go queen f1 check. King h2 is forced, and then queen g2 mate. However, if the king does go to h2, I have queen e2 check. And here, the only ways to avoid mate is bishop f2, queen takes, and then queen g2, the move after. So I thought I had a clear win if queen g6. and I couldn't really see any other good move for white. If knight takes g4, I can take the rook, so I win the exchange. That's nice and clear. But the move I missed was rook takes g7, and I briefly discounted this because king takes, queen takes, king h8, and there are no more checks. So I thought, okay, I'm a rook up temporarily, so I should be fine. But after knight takes, queen e2 and bishop f2, I then realised that he has the perpetual check, queen h6, queen g6, queen h6, forever. And at this point I panicked a little, and I missed what I think I would have found under normal circumstances. There is a way for black to win here. And it's a rather surprising move. It is rook a7. So it looks logical when you see it, but over the board, all the action is going over on the king side. Why are you moving a rook to a7? And the reason is that the bishop on c5 is not on prise because of my pin on the bishop on f2. My bishop on c5 is protecting the rook on f8, so every one of my pieces are protected. And there's no perpetual because I can swing the rook over to g7 and h7. And that now I can continue on with the attack. So I missed this move, which gives black at least a pawn advantage, according to the computer. So in the game, I panicked and I played queen takes f3. And after king h2, I then realized, very stupidly, that rook a7 now didn't work because his bishop was no longer pinned, so he could take on c5. So here I thought for a very long time, and I was extremely tempted to play queen takes f2 check, or queen takes g4, rook takes f2 check, and then follow it up with e5 and bishop d4, so centralizing the bishop and then trying to double rooks on the 7th. Eventually, though, I came to my senses and realized that this just wouldn't win for black. White should easily be able to, at the very least, perpetual, but if not, then win. So, reluctantly, I avoided the perpetual. I like playing on, and played queen f5. So, after queen takes h6 check, king g8, bishop takes, and again, if I take the bishop, there's a lot of perpetual checks with queen g6 and h6. So I took the knight, he took, I took, and here I was thinking, okay, I'm a pawn down for now, but maybe if he plays queen e3, I've got rook f3, I've got some ideas. But no, queen g5, queen takes, pawn takes, rook f2 check, king h3. So at this point, I sort of mentally wrote the game off as being drawn, and the next few moves are just sort of going through the motions, really. But I think I could have increased the chances of a win, even though it's still drawn. I could have perhaps put more pressure on my opponent by playing the move b3 here. So I've got the pawn on the 3rd rank, and his pawn is now under severe strain on b2. So after rook b1, I thought that perhaps king f7, king g4, and e5 were good moves, but I eventually sort of came to the conclusion that rook e1, and if I take, he'll take, and then I don't think I can win this, even though my pawn is very advanced. And he can't really play king e6 to try and protect the pawn on e5, because g6 is good for making the king move away. So I kind of half-heartedly analysed this, but eventually I came to the conclusion that after rook a5, white may even be winning this position because my pawns are dropping off. So, unfortunately, so let's say here I do have a trap with b2, but it doesn't really work. So, what would you play as white in this position? Well, the correct move is rook a7 check, king moves, rook b7, and now it's actually one for white. But there is a threat of, if you play rook b4, then I can win with rook c4 check, or at the very least draw, but I think this is winning for black. And if you don't take the rook, then I'm going to take yours and queen. So after you take, I then make a queen. And I think this is one for black, but perhaps a table base will say it's drawn. But anyway, it's very, very hard to draw this for white. And this would be a very nice position to have, where I could just play on and on and on. So perhaps b3 was a stronger candidate move, but instead I just simply took the pawn, he took, I took, and he plays very well defending against my passed pawns. He plays rook a7 to cut the king off, b3, king g4, rook c2, king h5. So there's possibilities of king g. If I play b2, then king g6 could be very worrying for me. So I play e5 and rook b7, b2, king g6. So there's lots of checkmates being threatened by white. So I check the king. He goes back, and now I just come back to c2. And next move it was agreed a draw, because after king e5 has played in the game, my drawing move is rook f2. And this is just, there's just nothing in this position. The white's rook will always have to stay on the b file. My rook will always stay on the second rank, and he can't really ever throw the pawns up and win with them. If in the future, if he does force me to, by playing king d4 and king c3, I can always win the 2 pawns on the g file. And even if through some effort he managed to take the pawn on b2 without losing both pawns, I could almost certainly take at least one of them with the king and rook combined, as his king would be very far away from them and my king would be very close to the pawns. So then it would just be either a king and pawn endgame or a rook and pawn versus rook drawn endgame. So yeah, this was a drawn match. So I hope you enjoyed the attacking elements in the middle game from that video. I wasn't playing that well in that game, so unfortunately it did fizzle out a bit, but at least I didn't lose. So comment, like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.